In the cold silence of the void, the stars twinkled like fragments of shattered glass, distant and unreachable. The Terran fleet hovered on the edge of the Axian expanse, a vast, uncharted region of space known only in whispers and tales of merchant fleets that never returned. 12 capital ships held formation, their hulls painted with the scars of countless campaigns. At the center of the armada stood TSV Courageous, the pride of humanity's navy, her sheer presence enough to inspire hope among allies and terror among those foolish enough to oppose the Terran Empire. Admiral Marcus Vallon gazed at the void through the panoramic viewport of the command deck, his steel-gray eyes reflecting starlight. The silence before an unknown war always felt heavy, as though the universe itself were holding its breath. This time was no different. "Sir," said Commander Amelia Rhodes, her voice sharp and efficient as always. "We're receiving long-range scans from Sentinel-4. The energy readings are off the charts. Whatever's out there, it's unnatural." Marcus turned his gaze from the stars and regarded his second-in-command. Her usual composure was cracking ever so slightly, subtle, but unmistakable. Rhodes didn't flinch easily, which made her unease that much more unsettling. "Unnatural," he repeated. "That's not a word I like hearing." "No, sir. But it fits. It's like nothing we've seen before." She hesitated. "Permission to speak freely?" "Granted. I think we're walking into a trap." Marcus didn't smile, though he wanted to. Trust Rhodes to cut through the false optimism that many officers clung to. "Probably," he admitted. "But that's what we do best." "Sir?" "Spring the trap first." As if on cue, Lieutenant Devereux at Communications turned in his chair. "Admiral, incoming transmission, open broadcast." The Admiral nodded. "Put it through." The viewport flickered, and the stars gave way to a dark, distorted image. Shadows swirled like ink in water, coalescing into something vaguely humanoid yet distinctly alien. 2 bright pinpricks of violet light flared within the darkness, and an echoing voice spilled forth. "Terrans, you dare enter the Axian expanse. Turn back, or be consumed by the Voidborn." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You'll have to do better than ominous threats to impress us." The shadows writhed violently in response, the voice growing louder, as though carried by a howling wind. "Your light will fade. Your flesh will fall to shadow." The message ended abruptly, and the viewport returned to stars. A long pause hung over the command deck before Rhodes finally spoke. "Diplomatic, aren't they?" Marcus couldn't help but chuckle. "I'll give them points for dramatics." He turned toward Devereux. "Relay to the fleet, maintain course and battle readiness. If these Voidborn want to threaten humanity, let's show them how we respond." Hours later, the fleet pierced through the edge of the expanse. Almost immediately, the void grew darker, as though the light of distant stars were being devoured. Systems flickered, and the once reliable hum of courageous engines took on an unsteady rhythm. "This is unsettling," Rhodes murmured, running diagnostics at her console. "It's like the laws of physics are misbehaving." Marcus stood at the center of the bridge, his fingers wrapped tightly around the handrail. "Stay sharp." The darkness shifted. From the abyss, shadows poured forth, forming massive, nightmarish constructs that bore faint echoes of ships. Where a Terran warship was steel and firepower, these vessels were black void-given form, rippling and shifting as though alive. Then, without warning, they attacked. Multiple contacts, opening fire. Devereux shouted. Space lit up with flashes of light as the fleet unleashed their first salvo. Railgun rounds screamed through the void, punctuated by bursts of missile fire that left glowing trails in their wake. But the shadow ships moved in impossible ways, slithering and darting through the Terran barrage. "They're slipping past our weapons," Rhodes called. "Adjust firing algorithms." Marcus barked orders as the shadow ships retaliated. Pulses of violet energy erupted across the void, striking the Terran fleet. Where the energy hit, hull plating blackened, corroding in a matter of seconds. Ships struggled to dodge and maneuver, but the shadow ships seemed to anticipate every move. "TSV Resolute has taken a direct hit. Get them support," Marcus shouted, his voice carrying over the cacophony. From the viewport, a massive wave of shadow hurtled toward the Courageous. Marcus barely had time to process it before a second Terran cruiser, the TSV Hammerstrike, broke formation and rammed into the wave head-on. There was a flash of light and a shockwave that rocked the Courageous. Marcus gritted his teeth, watching Hammerstrike's wreckage scatter through the void. "Damn it," Rhodes muttered, her voice low and strained. "We're losing too many." Marcus looked at the chaos and made a snap decision. "Order the fleet to cluster and focus fire on one target at a time. We're not playing their game anymore." The fleet regrouped. With pinpoint coordination, Terran ships turned their fury on the nearest shadow ship. It writhed as rounds and missiles tore into its form. Then, with a final pulse of energy, it shattered like glass. For the first time, a cheer broke out across the command deck. The battle raged for hours. Humanity's fleet, though battered and bloodied, fought with the tenacity that only Terrans could summon. Whenever a ship was lost, another would take its place. Whenever a shadow ship lashed out, Terran crews would meet the strike with overwhelming firepower. Even in the heart of darkness, humanity's fire burned bright. Marcus gripped the railing as a shadow tendril lashed toward the Courageous, only for a squadron of Terran fighters to intercept it. The tiny craft dove and weaved, unloading everything they had. "Those pilots are insane," Rhodes muttered, though there was admiration in her voice. "That's the Terran way," Marcus replied. "When the universe tells us to sit down, we stand up and throw a punch." At the height of the battle, a new energy surge registered on the sensors. "Admiral, something massive is coming through," Dever yelled. The viewport darkened as a titanic form emerged. The flagship of the Voidborn fleet loomed ahead, easily 10 times the size of the Courageous. Its surface undulated with shadows, and pulses of violet energy rippled across its hull. The crew fell silent. Marcus didn't hesitate. "All ships, focus fire on that monstrosity. If we're going down, we're taking it with us." The fleet obeyed. Terran ships closed ranks, unleashing everything they had. Railguns roared, missile silos emptied, and plasma beams scorched through the void. The Voidborn flagship responded with blasts of energy that ripped through ships like paper. In the chaos, Marcus's voice rang out across the fleet-wide comms. "This is Admiral Marcus Vallon to all hands. You don't fight for glory. You don't fight for medals. You fight because humanity doesn't know how to quit. We've carved our place in this galaxy with blood and grit, and we won't let shadows take it away. Not today. Not ever, asterisk." On every Terran ship, the message sparked a fire. Crews manned their posts with renewed determination. Engineers worked through failing systems. Pilots threw themselves into the fight, laughing over comms as they dodged death time and time again. "Admiral," Rhodes said, her voice breathless. "We have one shot. We overload the main reactor and channel it into the main gun. It'll either blow us to pieces or take that thing with us." Marcus nodded slowly. "Do it?" As systems overloaded, the Courageous shook violently. Lights dimmed and alarms wailed, but the crew held on. The shadow flagship loomed closer, its form blotting out everything else. "Ready!" Rhodes shouted. Firing and the main gun unleashed a beam of blinding energy that tore through the darkness. It struck the Voidborn flagship square in its center. For a moment, the shadows convulsed, twisting and screaming as though in agony. Then, with a final flash of violet and black, the monstrosity shattered. The shockwave rippled through the void, scattering the remaining shadow ships like ash in the wind. On the Courageous, the crew erupted into cheers. Marcus sank back into his chair, exhaling a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Status?" he asked. "Victory," Rhodes replied, a tired grin breaking across her face. Marcus allowed himself a small smile. "Good. Let's head home." Days later, as the fleet limped back to Terran space, the crew of the Courageous found time for rest. The mess hall buzzed with laughter and storytelling as soldiers swapped exaggerated tales of heroism. Marcus sat with Rhodes and a handful of officers, sharing a rare bottle of Earth-made whiskey. "To Hammerstrike," Rhodes said, raising her glass. "To all of them," Marcus replied. "They paid the price so we could win." The officers drank in silence for a moment before Lieutenant Devereux chimed in. "And to the Admiral, who called the Voidborn's bluff. You'll have to do better than ominous threats to impress us. He mimicked Marcus's voice with comical seriousness. Laughter erupted around the table, even from Marcus himself. I said that, didn't I? You did, sir, Rhodes replied, smiling. Turns out you're pretty quotable under pressure. Devereaux grinned. I can already see it on recruitment posters. The Voidborn don't impress us. Join the Navy. Marcus shook his head, chuckling. The last thing I want is to be a slogan. Well, you're a legend now, sir, Devereaux added. The officers raised their glasses again, and Marcus looked around the table. These were his people. His family. Humanity had faced the dark and emerged victorious. That's what Terrans did. No matter the odds, no matter the enemy, they fought, laughed, and survived. As the courageous sailed through the stars, battered but unbroken, Marcus allowed himself one final thought. The shadows may come, but the fire of humanity will always burn brighter.